sort of state?
No, it's just it's two things that when I realized that I was the universe. Let's figure it like that. That I was the conscience. I couldn't say I am Isabelle in Paris. And then writing those words and being there, that goes away. And again, it's like if I lose something, why do things fade away? Why do this feeling? You know, the other day you were saying that Ramesh told you, oh, okay, you just had an experience. That's fine.
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, actually, he said, "Don't worry about it. It was just an experience." Like,
yes.
Yeah. But actually, when that happens, I guess you're asking because it seems much more profound, right? It seems like this shouldn't go away.
Yes, something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that these peak experiences, because they seem so profound, we are convinced that that's what all the spiritual seeking is about and what the teachings are pointing at. And it makes sense that we will draw that conclusion because there is such a profundity to it. But as I came to reassess what they meant, then my attitude to them changed. So I see it as like a behind the scenes glimpse. So you get to see what is behind the scenes so that you understand what is there. So the example, you know that when you see a poster, from a distance, it looks like a very high quality image. And then if you go up really close, you see it's made up of a whole lot of dots and pixels. And if someone tells you, hey, do you know that the printing process is about a lot of dots? And you think, really? I've never noticed that. And then one day, and you go up and you look at a picture really close up and you realize actually it's made up of a lot of dots. And imagine if someone can get like a camera that zooms in on the poster and it magnifies the poster so you can see these dots, the dot construction much more. And it's like, oh, wow, you know, it's that zooming in, the camera zooming in shows you something that is normally not so available. And then the camera zooms back out again and the close-up image of all the dots that make up the picture isn't there anymore. But you've had the benefit of having that glimpse, having that sort of zoom in view. Then life is meant to return, you know, to the normal view. But now you know that the pictures are made of all these dots. Right? Yeah. And sometimes we feel like, oh no, I need to be able to see it in dots all the time. Maybe that's not as beneficial as we think. You know, we think that I'd like to see all the dots because it's something I haven't seen before. But maybe that would ruin the picture.
Wow.
Yeah. So ironically, we think that when the peak experience has faded away, we've lost something. We want it back. Maybe it's doing us a favor in a way, you know, that it fades away. But it means that our attitude to it has to change. We have to see that, oh, that wasn't enlightenment that has now faded away. That was a zoom in to show us something so that then we can integrate it into our integrated way of living. So what it shows you is the nature of consciousness that functions through the body. The nature of consciousness is unchanging. It's it's always present. It's the core of who we are. It's what is aware of the present moment. It is what flows through the body. And I would suggest that living happily as the human being has less to do with, that profound sense, but more about that integrating in a very subtle way into and becoming, it's always there, but in a very subtle way, not in the same form, where we live as the human being, and yet now we have an understanding that has been aided by the peak experience. The peak experience gives us some information that we didn't have before and allows something to change. And yet we live life simply from the perspective of the human being, but differently to how it was before the seeking happened. And that's why it's so important for me to keep saying, what are you really looking for as a seeker? Because, the seeker might say, I'm looking for the person to dissolve completely, and for me to know myself as impersonal consciousness or awareness, to know the world as an illusion arising in consciousness, for example, and know that experientially for the rest of my life. And I'd say, well, okay, that's your concept of liberation then, if someone says that. And the reason I believe they would say that is because a lot of teachings say that in order to bring about certain changes, certain shifts. That's what the teaching has to focus on. And obviously, as a seeker, if we're listening to a teaching that is saying, this is the truth, and I'm not saying the teaching shouldn't say that. I have a respect for a teaching for doing that, because the teaching understands what can be useful. So if the teaching is focusing on this awakening part, the seeker becomes convinced, because that's all the teaching is talking about. And then if the shift happens and it feels like a layer of belief and a layer of relativity has fallen away, so it actually feels like, oh, for the first time in my life, this is truth, because life isn't being interpreted through a lens of belief and thought like it was prior to the peak experience. And so it makes sense that the seeker says, oh, that was it. So then their concept of liberation becomes about that. And there might be a frustration in seeking for 10 years, waiting for that to come back in a way that is continuous and unbroken. And what if that's not what is available on a continuous, unbroken basis? What if the liberation is something much more simple or less extraordinary, right? Something like just living as a human being, but now the suffering dynamic dissolved. And that peak experience can be part of the suffering dynamic getting dissolved.